Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Onion Soup. And today I'd love to welcome to the show Miss Kristin, the author of My Aberrant Mind. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you today?
Doing pretty wonderful. So I'm really excited to hear about your journey and your story. I know you talk a lot about the journey to self-actualization and having come from a Catholic background. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I was born and raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school up until the eighth grade. And most people in eighth grade are all excited because they get to get confirmed. They have a big party. They get money and stuff like that. But I guess it started back then when I started asking questions. Like, wanted to know, why do we go to confession? Why does the Bible say we have brothers and sisters? So they had priests come sit down, talk to me a couple times. And I think he was more bothered by my answers than that. So, skip ahead a couple years, and my great grandma passed away when I was about 21, and I dreamt of her death.
Hmm.
Like, exactly, saw her flatline, and I woke up, had my first panic attack. And then in the morning, I came out and I was speaking to my mom, and she's like, Chris, I got to sit down and talk to you for a minute. I said, I already know. She said, Nanny died last night, and she gave me the time. And I was like, no, she died at, I forget, it was like 1:22. And because of my Catholic upbringing, spiritual gifts and all that kind of stuff was evil. It was of the devil. So it put me in a really bad position for a lot of years. Um, I have a very, very long journey. I That was just the start of it, but then I struggled through addiction, and I I can't even explain how it happened, but I was literally saved by grace. Like, I was put into a jail rehab program for 6 months, and after that, I started like working on what got me there. I started working through the religious dogma and learning about all the different religions. And then I had a spiritual awakening back in 2019. I wound up getting a house for free. I met my new husband. We have a baby, a whole new family. Like, it was just miraculous how it goes from, yeah, yeah,
Wow. So I kind of want to first dive into when we talk about spirituality and spiritual gifts and Catholicism, why do you think there's such a negative connotation to spiritual gifts?
my honest opinion. I think that the Bible was changed in the King James Version, and a lot of things were switched around so that the information can be hidden from us, so that we can't expand our consciousness, and so that we can stay lower level and they can make money off of us. And I could get really into this, but I could take it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. It's funny because I often talk about how the King James Version came about during the Council of Nicaea, where they
Yeah,
took various books of the Bible and basically laid them on a table and said, this is what we're going to have and this is what we're not going to have. If you actually look at
yeah,
the old story of it, the actual text is very short. The story goes that they put them on the table and then they asked God, and then the books
yeah.
that weren't canon fell off.
Yeah, yeah. I actually heard that version. It's really, yeah, um, yeah. I don't know. I'm sorry. It's my first podcast, so just bear with me for a minute.
Oh,
I
no.
actually about changing the text. I actually go into that in my book. I go over the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic, which is most likely what Yeshua or Jesus would have spoke. And the whole Lord's Prayer actually speaks of frequency and energy if you read it from the perspective in that language.
Oh, interesting. Can you read it for us really quickly?
Oh yeah, hold on. I'm sorry, I didn't have pages marked off for this. Oh, there we go. Here we go. Oh, thou art the breath of life comes, with who fills all realms with sound, light, and vibration. May your light be experienced by my utmost holiness, your heavenly domain approaches. Let your will come into the universe, all that vibrates, just as that is material and dense. Give us wisdom, understanding, and help us with your daily needs. Detach the fetters of thoughts that bind us. karma. Like, let us let go of the guilt of others. Let us not be lost in superficial things, but let us be freed from what keeps us off of our true purpose. May from you comes thy all will, the living strength to act. The song that beautifies and renews all from itself from age to age, sealed in trust, faith, and truth.
Oh, wow. That does sound extremely metaphysical. And I know that you
Yeah.
have a chapter in your book dedicated to the metaphysics in the Bible.
I'm so excited because science and spirituality are finally matching up.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. I think it's so interesting when we start looking at, well, one, as a scientist, my background is in science. So as a scientist, when we start looking at, subatomic particles and we start realizing that everything is energy, you start to find that's where the similarities are coming from. When people say science and spirituality are catching up to each other, that's the similarities. We are all energy and we are all connected.
Yep. Yep. We're all one. When I first woke up, I started drawing this big circle up here and then how it breaks down into rays of light. I didn't even know what I was talking about when I was doing it. But yeah, we all come from the same source and just have, you know, different perspectives that we take back, I believe.
Oh, wow. Can you tell us a little bit more about the circle that you draw and the lights that come down? I know a lot of people utilize visualization and spirituality. So tell us about your practice.
Okay, well, I just call it source, call it God, call it universe, call it energy, call it, it's all the same to me. But I think that that is what exists in all things. And the way I see it in my head is as if there is one big solid energy and it breaks off into all the rays of lights and colors. And then all the rays and lights and colors break down even smaller. And it comes down to when we get to the level of the dirt. But it goes through all the different dimensions of reality, and like we start and it goes down to material, the most dense matter, which would be just like minerals and rocks. And
Interesting. So when did you first have this realization?
well, I had a spiritual awakening in the form of a spiritual emergency. I don't know if I
Mm.
mentioned that or not, in 2019, right prior to COVID hitting. So I think a lot of us start waking up like, get your stuff together now, like kind of thing. I'm sorry. I blacked out sometimes. When yeah, sometimes be multidimensional, I forget a lot.
Oh, interesting. Talk about being multidimensional, what it feels like.
It's being able to look at things from multiple perspectives. A lot of voices going on in my head, but I'm not schizophrenic. They're all mine. Just different levels of mine, if that makes any sense. Different dimensions of reality until you go back to the process. Like if I shut my eyes, I see like a bright blue dot. And like I think everything starts out there. It comes I'm sorry. I don't mean to mess up your show. It's very hard to explain this kind of stuff.
You're definitely not messing up the show by any means. I think it's very
Okay.
important to talk to people whom have had recent spiritual awakenings, and specifically, as I was saying before, people who come from a more Catholic and religious background, because
Eh,
there's so much um, animosity. That's not the word I'm looking for. There's so much tension. There we go. When it comes to spirituality and religion.
And it's a shame because a lot of the people that I think are involved in the church are good people. They just don't know better. A lot of them.
I agree.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of times when you have someone that's in the church, it seems as if, or as I was told at a young age, a lot of people go to church to be led and not to be taught. So people go to
Right.
church to have their hand held.
Not outside of themselves. That's the problem. Instead of seeking inside for God, they look outside for God, and they just don't know differently. And then if you try to tell, that was a lot of the reason why I wrote my book, was because I'm what the house. I think I got moved 3 states away from where I grew up, and people in my book club and stuff like that are very. I'm in the Bible Belt. I'm in Virginia right now, and so a lot of people don't accept or understand. But I think that soon it's going to be so evident that people are going to need to understand. I tried to break down to the basics that I could in my book so to help them along the way. Like when I literally was seeing now that I know what was going on, but I was seeing demons and dark entities. My face was getting stuck when I was having my spiritual awakening, but that was just me facing my own religious dogma and the beliefs that I created from the church of what evil looks like and what bad is. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. I also grew up in the Bible Belt. I grew up in Georgia. And I 100% understand when we start talking about seeing spiritual entities, the Bible does tend to paint a negative picture on the majority of the spiritual beings. And there's a very small slither that's positive, and we call those angels when we look at it from a Catholic perspective. But when we start talking about spiritual gifts, it's not as if it's not present in the Bible and not currently present in Catholicism because that's what the priests do. That's what the Pope does. That's what the bishops do. They all have these different spiritual gifts.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And yes, they are allowed to have them and know about them though. That's the problem. I think information needs to be available to everybody.
Yeah, exactly. It seems as if, when people start talking about the quote unquote patriarchy, it seems as if it's only a very select few individuals whom are allowed to communicate and talk to God. But what a lot of people are starting to wake up to is that we all have that ability to communicate and internalize the feeling of love and God intuitively within ourselves.
Yeah, because we all are one. So of course.
For
But
sure.
it takes a long time it took a long time for me to fully understand that. Um, I don't know if you've spoken to anybody who had that recent 2019 of a realization, but man, the information out there. So you go through so many different levels. Like you learn new things all the time. Go through your. I've seen a lot of people. I started out on the spiritual side, but a lot of people start out on the political side with awakening, then move into the spiritual. Like, okay, well, if this is all wrong politically, then this is wrong spiritually. I mean, then what else is wrong? What else have we been not told about? I keep losing track of my thoughts. Very sorry.
No, it's perfectly fine, and it's interesting what you say about people going from political perspective and taking that avenue to spirituality. I was just talking to someone yesterday, and we discussed how it's very important to reevaluate your childhood beliefs as an adult and see if they're still in alignment with yourself.
Right. And then sometimes you have to reparent yourself as well.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
you have to give yourself that love. And, I think one of the hardest things for me to accept is I thought that self love was selfish. To differentiate the two of them was very, very important for me to do. Like, and to realize that you give when your cup is filled, you give your overflow. You don't want to give from an empty cup because, you know,
Yeah,
you wind up
exactly.
hurting yourself.
It's so funny because I was the exact same way for a very long time that I just wanted to give, give, give. And I still do. I mean, I love people and I love helping people. But at the same time, it got to the point where I was doing it to the detriment of myself. And just
Yes.
like you said, I felt like self love was selfish for whatever
Yeah.
reason. And I don't even know where that idea comes from.
I don't know. I don't know either. But I guess it's something that's ingrained in us. As a child, I guess, you don't want to be selfish. They teach you not to be selfish, but they don't teach you self love. I think also in the schools, like we're not learning the right things either. If kids could learn a lot of this stuff when they're little, then they wouldn't grow up with all these problems. Like I said, when I was blessed with grace and I literally got picked up from New Jersey and put in a house that I owned in Virginia, I had my baby. I'm 45. She's now 5. So we're trying to homeschool and teach her how to do things differently. We're trying to teach her how to grow a garden, which we're learning how to do too, so that we can become self sufficient. So we're trying to do it differently with her. And I think that if everybody starts doing stuff like that, I think just little changes like that could really change the whole world for a better place.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think it's very important to really break yourself out of what we have now called the social norm and get more into nature, get more in tune with everything around you, and kind of step away from the obsidian mirror. I heard this term recently. The obsidian mirror being the TV and your phone screen because when it's turned off, it's black. But before we go a little bit further, I definitely want to take a word from our sponsors. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So, I would actually like to dive a little bit further into another chapter you have in your book, and it's
Okay.
labeled The Linguistics of Prayer. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So that one, the Lessons of Prayer, I believe, is the Lord's Prayer. Is the one we started reading. Yes.
Okay. So, in that particular chapter, is that where do you kind of like go through and break down almost sentence by sentence what that means?
No, I do not. I give the conversation in King James version and in Aramaic version, and then I put in quotations like fetters the bonds we break and stuff like that, like karma, and like write down where and what it they are.
Interesting. What does karma have to do with Catholicism?
Well, it's not mentioned directly in Catholicism, I don't believe, but I think that was another thing that was taken out of the Bible to begin with. I can't remember the characters exactly, but I know John and Jesus were and there's a part in the Bible that tells about when they were somebody else. I don't know if it was Enoch or who they were before, but it speaks of it briefly, but it doesn't say reincarnate. Oh no, reincarnation. I just switched total subjects on you there.
Oh no, it's perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. We could definitely talk about Enoch and reincarnation. So first, let's start with Enoch. Can you talk about who Enoch was and why he was important, and also why the Book of Enoch was probably taken out of the Bible?
From what I understand, Enoch was a great grandson, I think, of Noah. And am I correct? Or yes, I wasn't sure if it was Noah or Moses. And he is, besides Jesus, he's the only other character in the Bible that seems to ascend into the heavens in a physical body. And I think that's why it was taken out, because it leaves that possibility open that there's so much more out there that we don't know about.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the Book of Enoch, it actually starts talking about exactly what you said. He was taken into heaven, but it describes it as, I believe it's something like fiery chariots came down
Yeah,
from the sky, picked him up.
UFOs.
Yeah, exactly. And he, like, describes the entire place that he went to in detail.
Yeah. And I think they said he went back in body. That's where he stayed, right?
Yeah.
They kept him up. It's really interesting. Also, the Gospel of Thomas was taken out. All the Mary Magdalene stuff was taken out. They turned her into a prostitute in the Bible, and there's a good chance that that may have been Jesus's wife. And there's so many. This is such an interesting life that we live in, because there's so many different realities that are possible. It's almost like kind of we got to pick up which timeline we're on and which we're. That,
Yeah, it's funny because, yeah, it's very probable that Mary Magdalene was Jesus' wife, and even when we talk about the name of Jesus, the word or the letter J didn't exist in
right,
Hebrew. So
Yeshua.
yeah, Yeshua. But where when did you first start looking into the Apocrypha?
I learned about it probably around the eighth grade when I started doing my study, and then when I was out of spirituality for a long time due to my addiction. Part of that was to keep my spiritual gifts away, because I thought that they were evil, and then I thought that I was evil. So if I didn't have my gifts, I felt okay. And then when I first had my awakening in 2019, my spiritual emergency, I started hearing like stuff like that in my head. Now I know it's my higher self. I didn't know where the heck it was coming from, but the voice that talks to you that sounds like you, and which apparently not everybody has too, which I find very interesting. But then I started hearing to look up the lost books and start studying to find out what else is out there. And then that leads you down to so many different religions, and you go into all the different religions, and they all basically boil down to the same thing: God is love.
That's exactly what happened to me, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that I grew up in the church. I did go to church a lot, especially with my grandmother, but my father has always been a very open-minded individual. He was very much about doing your own research, and my mother, to this day, is still a librarian. She's been a librarian my entire life. So I was surrounded by books. But I had this realization that all these religions in the world believe that are right. This is me when I was probably probably about the 8th grade-ish. And, they can't all be wrong. So I started looking more into it, and you start to find that they talk about the exact same thing. They all talk about love and loving thy neighbor. They talk about energy. They talk about having a relationship with God.
Yeah. Kind of like now, different people were just sent different places and explained the same thing and then lost translation over the years and then separation came into play and we don't know what happens next. Then we have wars on religion and everything else.
Exactly. There's one more thing I kind of want to dive into as we approach the end of our segment today. You talked a lot about addiction relative to your awakening of spiritual gifts. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I was trying to numb myself, to shut myself off so that I didn't have access to any I couldn't hear and see things that I didn't want to hear and see, such as when my grandma flatlined. That was what real. I really was scared. Like I didn't understand why that was happening, and honestly I don't know why. I was only in what I was 12. I thought that my dream caused her to die. Like I had it backwards in my head, and then that started on with guilt and shame, and then after that, I lost six close relatives. My grandparents had raised me when I was little. Mostly, my mom was around, but my dad, I don't even know who he was at the time. And when they all passed away, I didn't know how to cope or survive. And but as soon as I got clean, I would say within the first year, it all came back on very hard. And this time, like I had a good life. I had a family that I love at home, a brand new baby. We got custody of my stepson, so I had to figure out what it was. I couldn't just keep shutting it off anymore. That was no longer an option for us.
Wow, I think that's so powerful and important for a lot of our viewers, and honestly myself as well, because when I was younger, I had a lot of same things, spiritual gifts, and I didn't know what it was, didn't know what was
Right? And
going on.
right?
Yeah, yeah. And then in my 20s, I was a very, very heavy drinker, especially when I did my time in the military, because that's a lot of what soldiers do is drink.
Yeah,
And I started feeling more awakened to my spiritual gifts and abilities, and even still to this day, there's so much more growth and so much more going on with myself internally.
yeah. It's so beautiful because it happens in steps. It's like an onion getting down to the bottom of the core. And my favorite saying, like even me being on here today, is hard for me to step out of my comfort zone because I always felt like the one that just wasn't the same as everybody else. But if nothing changes, nothing changes, and that's like my favorite.
Yeah, I love that. I would also say that in order to truly
Uh
experience
oh,
growth, you have to start being a little bit uncomfortable.
we froze.
Oh no. Well, well, that's okay. We're starting to approach the end here today, and I can still hear you. So, as we close out our segment today, is there anything that you want to leave with the audience? Alrighty, well, it looks like we lost Miss Kristin Dolce, but that's okay. I really had a great time talking to her today. We're gonna try and get her back on so we can properly close out the segment. But I think it's very important when we start talking about You know what? Really, what religion has to do with spirituality and how they might not always seem like they line up. But one thing I really want to touch on, honestly, is the major difference that I find between religion and spirituality are the dogmatic practices in religion. Because sometimes it seems to me that the dogma of religion can be very rigid and strict. And we don't necessarily always want to, we don't, it's not necessarily not hard to grow when things are so rigid, but when you start staying into a dog or stick to a dogmatic practice, it does prevent growth a little bit. And welcome back.
Sorry about that. I'm not even sure what happened.
Oh no, it's perfectly fine, perfectly fine. I was just sharing with the audience that I feel that sometimes it seems as if religion and spirituality are different and separate, but really I feel like the main difference in religion and spirituality is that religion has a lot of strict and rigid dogmatic practices.
Right, right. The whole practice of a heaven and hell, like heaven elsewhere and hell eternal. Yeah. Fear.
Yeah, there's a lot of fear based beliefs and ideology backing religion, and more specifically Catholicism, because when you start looking at some of the other religions of the world, they're not as fear based.
Yeah. I agree. I agree definitely.
So as we start to come towards the end here, we only have a few minutes left. Is there anything that you want to leave the audience before we go?
Um, no, I just no, another little favorite saying of mine. Sometimes you have to walk through the dark to be able to start to see the light inside of you.
Ooh, interesting. Actually, can we talk about that real quick before we close out? Yeah, so what do you mean by that? 'Cause I know you have something. There's a chapter in your book called Darkness or Dark something.
That was definitely that was my book about the addictions and my the deaths and the losses in my life, and it was not an easy job, especially because I had a death of a stillborn during that time. So there was a lot to heal from, but you have to turn around and somehow, after you dig through all the deepness, you have to see the lesson and the blessing and how all of those things that might have appeared to be dark led you up to where you are today. And you wouldn't be that person without those lessons or those experiences.
Wow, I love that. I love the ability to be able to look at the positive aspects of things when it seems like it's the darkest of days.
Yeah. Look at the yin and yang. It's all one, still trying to teach the same. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. You can't have darkness without the light. You can't have light without darkness because if there was only light, you would have nothing to contrast it to.
You wouldn't know. Yes. You wouldn't be able to have the perspective or the experience.
Wow, exactly. Well, I want to thank you again for coming on. It was truly a pleasure to talk to you. And where can we find your book, by the way?
Oh, it's on Amazon, TikTok Shop, Ingram Sparks, or www.myaberrantmind.com.
Awesome.
Oh,
I'm
and
really,
sometimes I forgot to share this earlier. I'm sorry. I know we got to get off. Aberrant means outside of the box. A lot of people get thrown off by that.
I love that. I love the idea of thinking outside the box and not just in the traditional sense, but when it comes to a holistic perspective, there has to be so much more out there.
Yes. It was a pleasure speaking with you today.
It's a pleasure talking with you as well. I had a great time. This is a really good episode. And thank you, everybody, for listening and tuning in to this episode of Onion Scoop. Have a great one. Bye.
Thank you.